Hello children, I am Miss Jayashree here. Today we will continue the next video hydrosphere lesson. So in the last class I stopped near the waves. Now we will discuss about the tides. The rise and fall of seawater due to the gravitational forces of the sun and the moon are called tides. Tidal currents affect the whole water mass from the sea surface to the bottom. The sea waves produced by the tides are called tidal waves. The sea waves which are produced by the tides are called the tidal waves. The rise of seawater and its movement towards the coast is called the tide. The seawater will rise due to the gravitational force of the moon and the sun, and it moves towards the coastal part. It is called as a tide, and the resultant of high water level is known as high tide. The fall of seawater and its movements towards the sea is called ebb, and the resultant low water level is called as the low tide water. When the water will rise and when again it will fall, and in a small form of wave when it will reach to the coastal area, it is called as a ebb, and the resultant low water level is called as the low tide water. The difference between the high tide water and the low tide water is called as the tide range. Here a question may be asked you children, what is ebb, what is high tide, what is low tide, and what is tidal range? What is the tide range? Tide range between the difference between the high tide and the low tide, means the range, how much height it goes and how much low tide will go to a particular height. The difference between the height of the high tide and the difference between the height of the low tide is called as the tide range. So children, we will discuss about the tides over here. See, tides. In the tides we will discuss about the formation, types of tides, nature of tides, effects. So in the type of tides we will discuss about the spring tides, neap tides, and in the nature of tides we will discuss high tides and low tide. What is tide? Already I told you. Formation, how the tides are formed. Tides are formed due to the gravitational effect of the sun and the moon. In the new moon day and in the full moon day, the formation of the tides will be more. Types of tides, spring tide and neap tide. Nature of tide, whether it will be a high tide or low tide, and after the tide will form, what will be the effect of the tides. So we will discuss now about the effects of tides and how the factors which are responsible for the formation of the tides. Factors that cause tides. The tides have their origin in the gravitational forces of the sun and the moon. The earth rotates from west to east and revolves around the sun following an elliptical orbit. Similarly, the moon also rotates from west to east and revolves around the earth along an elliptical orbit, so that the distance between the moon and the earth changes during the different times every month. The period of the farthest distance between the moon and the earth is called the apogee, while the period of the nearest distance is called as the perigee. Apogee and perigee. Apogee means the farthest distance between the moon and the earth, and the nearer distance between the moon and the earth is called as perigee. The surface of the earth facing the moon experiences maximum gravitational force of the moon, while it will be minimum at the opposite side of the earth. Consequently, the water on the earth's surface facing the moon is attracted and pulled up, and thus the high tide occurs. See children, here when the moon is facing towards the earth or the earth is facing towards the moon, what will happen? The direct gravitational force or more gravitational force will be there on the surface of the earth by the moon, and high tide will occur, and consequently the water on the surface of facing the moon is attracted and pulled up, and thus the high tide occurs. High tide is also formed at the opposite side of the earth simultaneously because of the reactionary or the centrifugal force of the gravitational and centripetal force of the moon, causing the outward bulge of the water. All of you see the diagram over here, varying distance of the earth and the moon. Here the moon is nearer to the earth, high tide will be formed, and like that apogee, the distance of the earth and the moon will be more over here. See, the distance is less, perigee, and the distance will be more, that is called as apogee. Now we will discuss occurrence of high and low tide due to the gravitational force of the moon on the surface of the earth water. See, this is the formation of the high tide, and this is also the formation of the high tide. Okay, due to the gravitational force of the sun. Because the earth is rotating from west to east, in the same way moon is also rotating around the sun in an west to east manner. Due to this attraction of the moon, due to the gravitational force, both the sides there will be the formation of the high tides. So now we will discuss about the nature of the tides. Two tides and ebbs are experienced twice at every place on the earth water surface in 24 hours. Tides means up crest and ebbs will be the down crest. Two tides and ebbs are experienced twice at every place on the earth water surface in 24 hours. High tides. When the sun, the earth and the moon are in the same line at the time of the full moon and new moon day, their gravitational forces work together and high tides are formed. When the high tides will be formed? When there will be location of the earth, sun and moon on a plane. Due to the more gravitational force on the new moon day and the full moon day, the high tides are formed. See the diagram. New moon day and full moon day, there will be more gravitational force in the full moon day and new moon day, and high tides are formed. Low tides. When the sun and the moon are at the opposite, at the position of right angle with reference to the earth, the gravitational forces of the sun and the moon work against each other, and hence low tides are formed. How the low tides are formed? When the sun and the moon are at the position of right angle with reference to the earth, the gravitational force of the sun and the moon work against each other, and hence low tides are formed. This situation occurs during the 8th day of each fortnight of a month. Means after 8 days after Purnima and after 8 days of Amavasya, full moon and new. Now we will discuss about the periodicity of tides. On an average, every place experiences tides twice a day. Since the earth completes its rotation roughly 24 hours, every place should experience tides after 12 hours, but this never happens. Each day tide is delayed by 26 minutes because the moon also rotates on its axis from west to east while revolving round the earth. Since the earth rotates from west to east, the tide center shifts westward. When the tide center completes one round, the moon's position is ahead of the tide center by that time. The moon also revolves around the earth, with the result the tide center takes another 52 minutes to come under the moon. Thus, a particular tide center takes 24 hours 52 minutes because of this delay to come under the moon, but by the time there is another tide at the opposite side of the referred tide center, and this happens after 12 hours and 26 minutes. Not exactly 12 hours, but there will be a shift of 52 minutes. 52 by 2 is equal to 26. So, 12 hours 26 minutes, one high tide, again 12 hours 26 minutes, another high tide will be formed. Types of tides. The oceanic tides are caused due to the tide producing forces of the sun and the moon. This is a lot of temporal and spatial variation in the tide producing forces because of different positions of the sun and the moon with the earth. Because of variation in the intensity of tide, producing forces, several types of tides are caused. Two important types of tides are given below: spring tide and neap tide. Very high tide is caused when the sun, the moon and the earth are almost in the same line. Such high tides are called as spring tides. Here a question may be asked, what is spring tide? When there will be high tide because of the position of the sun and the moon and the earth almost in the same line, then a spring tide is formed. What is a neap tide? When the sun, the earth and the moon come in the position of quadrature or right angle to each other on the 7th or 8th day of every fortnight of a month. The tide producing forces of the sun and the moon work in opposite direction with a result of a low tide that occurs. Such tide is called as a low tide or a neap tide. All of you see this diagram. Production of the low tide, quadrature nature, and production of the low tide, earth, moon and sun. They are right angle to each other. Here low tide is formed. Okay children, all of you see and practice the diagrams and definitions. Thank you.